I'll be your host for today's session. First, I would like to greet our speaker for today, Dr. Pearl Subin from Monash University. Good morning, Dr. Pearl.
Good morning.
Hope you're doing great.
Good.
And our moderator for today, Bapak Muhammad Nanang Suprayogi, SC, MSc, PhD. Good morning, Pak Nanang.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good evening.
All right. Today's science session is the first out of two series, which will be held throughout this month. Make sure to keep updated for the upcoming series. The main topic of today's science session is about current issues on differentiated instruction. For the next 1.5 hours, together we will discuss this topic with our speaker and moderator. Before we start our study sessions, let's sit up straight and sing the national anthem of Indonesia, followed by the hymn of Monash University. And now I would like to welcome the representative of the Department of BINUS University of Psychology of BINUS University. An opening speech and remarks will be delivered by Kak Anissa Nandaliani, MPhilSy Psycholog.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. Here I am as the representative of Psychology Department in BINUS University. For today's activity, I would like to represent all of us in the Psychology Department to thank Dr. Pearl Suban, who willingly spent her time in the middle of her holiday in Africa. We hope you have a wonderful journey and holiday there, and always in good condition. And also, we would like to say thank you to Mr. Nanang, who will be the moderator of this activity, and hope that all of the participants will get something and learn something today about the differentiated instruction, so that we can apply it and realize how important it is to be applied in teaching, daily teaching. Maybe that's all from me. Thank you so much and have a wonderful time today. Good morning.
Thank you, Kananda. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's welcome our moderator for today, Bapak Muhammad Nanang Suprayogi, SPC MSc. Over to you, Bapak Nanang.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Paul. We are very happy. Currently, we will have a very good occasions and opportunity to sharpen our knowledge, of course, about differentiated instructions. It's well known that Dr. Paul Suban says really have serious concern in implementing the different instruction, also research about differentiated instructions, more specifically in higher educations. So today, and we will continue on Monday, the 5th of December, we will talk about differentiated instruction. Hopefully, it will be enrich our information, our knowledge about differentiated instructions. And here, the participants are students and also lecturers and faculty members in BINUS University. I already informed this to our faculty members, and maybe in the middle of the sharing session, they will be joined. So without further any ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Paul Suban to share her ideas, her information, her valuable knowledge about differentiated instructions. Dr. Paul Suban is a senior lecturer in Monash University, and it's well known related to the differentiated instructions. So, times for you, Dr. Paul Suban, to share with us about differentiated instructions.
Thank you very much, Nanang, for that lovely welcome. And thank you also to Hannah and Nanda as well for introducing the session as well. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And yes, this time zooming in from Africa. But still, it's like we continue being educators wherever we are. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. And maybe one day I can come and visit Indonesia. I've had so many presentations there, Nanang.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yes, and last week at Ambon, so it was really good meeting the team there, and some really nice questions came out of the presentation too. So it was really good. So I'm going to share my screen, but because it is a bit more of a discussion section, and Nanang will be moderating, we'll pause for some comments or questions as I go. So we can talk about things. It is meant to be more of a discussion. So, and we do have 2 sessions, so we could probably take that over 2 sessions as well. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and Yeah, and hopefully you see that as well. All good there? Yep, thumbs up.
Yeah, it's
All
clear.
good. All right, excellent. Okay, so essentially we are going to be looking at the idea of differentiated instruction. And since I was not sure of where everyone is at, because remember, like differentiated instruction teachers implement, we have to know where our students are at. It was a bit of a challenge this time because we weren't sure who was going to come and who wasn't. We'll do a little bit of an introduction and then talk about some of the more introductory entry point elements, and then of course we'll finish up with some more higher order differentiated strategies as we go. All right, so here we are. So in Australia, we often begin our presentations or any meeting with an acknowledgement of the country on which we live. And this is because we acknowledge that the traditional owners of the Australian land are the Indigenous First Nations people of the country. So I would like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I usually work, because that's the place where I live and work in Melbourne. I recognize collectively their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and I pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to their elders past and present. And when I do this, I'm often situating myself as both an immigrant. I'm an immigrant into Australia because, as you know, I'm coming to you from Africa. So I'm from South Africa, but I've immigrated to Australia for about 25 years. So I do call Australia home, but I'm also very aware that my position in the country is in relation to the Kulin Nation, who own the land and who are custodians of the land where I live. So that's where I position myself in that. Now, we're going to have like I said, a bit of a snapshot today, but what I'm hoping to get us to think when we are introduced to something for the first time, it's often through thinking. And we think about student diversity, and I'm going to speak a little more about that. So like I was saying earlier, I did do a short session. It was fairly short at a conference last week to an Indonesian audience as well. And we talked about student diversity and who are the students that we teach. And I want us to be collective in our discussion about that. So when I get to that section as well. Also, when we think about it from a higher education perspective, we are often drawing literature and studies and documentation into the things that we do. And as people who think about differentiated instruction, and often we think about it very much in terms of ability, we also need to think about the fact that there's a lot of traditional knowledge in Indonesia, as there is amongst the Indigenous people in Australia, about how we can use that knowledge to actually support learning. So sometimes we just think about it in terms of ability. You know, this student is very capable and this student is not as capable, but it's not just about that. Remember that people who have been accommodated in terms of their needs and their expectations of culture and so on, it's actually stronger if we do it in that way. So I often say this, and I'm sure Nanang and all the team at BINUS say the same, that we remain learners. Remember that in order to be good teachers, in order to be good educators, you have to continue learning all the time as well. I'm sure many of you must have heard of Maya Angelou. She is no longer with us. She has passed on, but she was an American civil rights activist, and she spoke a great deal about education. She was not a teacher or an educator, just a civil rights advocate. But at the same time, she was very aware that in order for us to succeed as a people, when I say people, I mean across the world, because as much as, you know, I'm speaking to you from Africa, but I'm teaching in Australia, and you are from Indonesia. We could be anywhere in the world. I could teach in Indonesia. You could come and teach in Australia. You could teach here in Africa. And, you know, it's always a good idea for us to come to know the educational context wherever we are. I hope all of you one day come to visit me, as I hope to come and visit you. So, you know, it's a good idea for us to be thinking about this idea of a tapestry. Now, a tapestry, Nanang, what would be the Indonesian word for tapestry? It's like a carpet, you know, that's been richly knitted together. What do you think that is? What's the word for the carpet? What do you think? Like a rug with a lovely design. What is it?
Lemari, is there? Is it?
Lemari? What do you think? Is it Lomari? Like, it's the rug. Sometimes we put it on the wall.
Yeah.
Because it's so-
Permadani.
Oh,
Yeah. Like a carpet with the
Yes.
design, right? Yes.
Yes, that's it. What is
oh
it?
yeah.
Ya, kita sebut karpet atau permadani.
Madani, is that it?
Permadani.
Parmadani. Okay, so you got the idea right. Now, if you think about the richness of that, I mean, like I said, I'm currently in Africa. There's a lot of African design around me, but it's all good. In Australia, there is a lot of indigenous and modern Australian tapestries as well. But if you look at the way in which it's woven together, there are threads that come from different colors and different textures. Some are thicker, some are thinner, some are colored, some are not colored. Some are orange and red and yellow, and depending on what the colors are. And, it comes together in order to form this very beautiful pattern so that it's allowing it to be very beautiful. So every one of the threads actually adds to the richness of the design as well. So when we think about it in this regard, we've got to be thinking about classrooms in this way as well, that every student, regardless of their background or their language or their culture or their ability or their language to some degree, because sometimes we have children from different, or students from different backgrounds. I say children sometimes because I'm a pre-service teacher, or I teach pre-service teachers. I used to be a pre-service teacher. So when you think about how this all comes together, differentiated instruction is about acknowledging the strengths of every student. And no matter what their background is, they add value to the classroom. So we've got to be using them to enrich them. She adds on the fact that we have a moral obligation, and a moral obligation simply means that as an educator, we have no choice but to accommodate the student who is different. So that's probably a very important part of differentiated instruction. And that's why all of you, as I am, are advocates. So, Nanang leads a lot of workshops, I know, among you, because we know we can't overlook this. This is something that's part of who we are. So it's something that we need to think about. So I thought we would start, and I want you to be thinking about this as well, because we are sharing. And maybe for us to be thinking about where do we fit in terms of differentiated instruction in our world today. So many of you would have been watching the news as the world changed through COVID-19. COVID-19 changed everything. I mean, I just recently traveled. Some of you might have traveled as well. The world travel is very different nowadays, so it's not as we used to do in the past, apart from the fact that it costs a whole lot more nowadays to move from one country to the next. There's awareness of disease and masking and social distancing, and, food is not served in the same way, and everyone's very cautious and worried. And if you are in the supermarket or you're in the street and someone coughs or someone sneezes, it's not like it used to be before, where we'd be, we'd think, oh, that person's probably getting a cold and it's not such a big deal. Now we think, oh my goodness, I hope they don't have COVID. I hope they don't, it's just a strange world that we live in. But in the space of that changing world, we realized there were other things that happened in 2020. The Black Lives Matter protests exploded around the world, and it happened in every country. I'm pretty sure it must have affected Indonesia as well. It affected Australia. It happened very strongly here in South Africa, because this is a country that has had past power struggles as well, and it began to reflect on power and the way it was held in the past. So remember, race is a huge issue in Australia, as you can tell from the way that I started. And race is a big issue here in South Africa, because South Africa used to be a country that had racial law embedded in its statutes. And so it used to say that people of color are less than people who are white. So we just think about how that's being positioned as well. Now, when we change as teachers, we need to think about all these power structures and the way in which this has impacted on education. And the last thing is intersectionality. Let me pause for a moment. Did anyone ever hear the word intersectionality, and what do you think it means? Where does it come from? The word intersection, where does that come from?
Hard. Raise hand.
Reinhard? Nanang, is that the Indonesian word for intersection? It's on the road.
I think it's more, sorry, Ms. Per, I think it's like empowering of other people to know more about the knowledge. Know more.
Yes. Oh, well done. That is excellent. So I can't see you, but I know that that's the actual, that's the answer. Well done. So it's the idea of considering what other people bring into the, what do other people bring in? Well done. Is it Reinhardt?
I think it's to know your mistakes and know. And I'm sorry about the background. I'm gonna change it. Right.
I know, no, the background can be very tricky. I
Okay.
know. Oh, there we are. Yes.
I think it's empowering people who don't know about everything to know everything about that knowledge. I think the internet.
Yes, it's well done. It's a different form of knowledge. That's exactly right. So, it's now in world literature, and it came about from America. The term itself was coined by an American academic, Kimberly Crenshaw, and absolutely right, Reinhardt. She comes from that perspective of each person bringing a different element of knowledge. And what she said was that sometimes on account of color and background and race and language, some situations are less than, but they are not really less than. It's just because in a certain, like for example, at the moment we are speaking in English. We are giving English a lot of power, which might not be correct. We shouldn't be giving English so much power. What made English so powerful? Bahasa could be powerful. If I knew Bahasa, I'd speak Bahasa more. I know only a little bit, so I couldn't quite get in. But, that's power struggle. And that's exactly what we mean. The element of knowledge that we bring in from our backgrounds are things that create intersections, and when you think about intersections, we think about it like in English, it's the intersections of streets, so when you come to a stop street, you stop and you let the other car pass if you're driving. And then you proceed across the street when you get to the intersection. So what intersection means is that you get to the intersection and you consider all the others as well. And you consider the intersections as they meet as well. So we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. All right. So let me pause and consider the scenario. All right. So South Africa is a huge seafood eating country. Most of the country is bordered by coastline. And I'm sure it's the same in Indonesia as well. There's a lot of seafood everywhere. So let's pause and consider the scenario. All right. So imagine that you were invited to a friend's home for lunch. Your friend knows that you are allergic to seafood. And when you get there, you realize that everything that has been laid out on the table is related to seafood. So you can't eat anything. What will your reaction be? Naturally, you're going to be concerned. Firstly, because you will not be able to eat at the lunch because there's seafood and you are allergic. And secondly, your friend has completely overlooked your needs. And that's upset you because you thought your friend was going to be someone who took care of you. And how is this possible? So if we think about it, our classrooms are a little bit like that. Our students arrive at our classrooms. Each of them has needs. We need to accommodate the needs. And even if we use the word cater, because cater is a more food-oriented term, we should accurately cater for the students that we teach. So that's the fundamental element of differentiated instruction. So say if I had to use intersections and the food metaphor, you'd understand that students come and no one is less than. We're not thinking about one as being greater and one as being less. We remember the tapestry idea that everyone contributes value to the tapestry. And in this sense as well, we are accurately catering for the students that we teach. All right, so hopefully the lunch metaphor also works. All right, so let's pause for a second. All right, so I'm going to get you to do some thinking and you can put them into the chat. I'll just open the chat up here as well. And I'll put it onto the side so I can see it too. Okay, so as we go through this discussion, I want you to consider the students that you are teaching. So think in terms of who do you teach? If you are an educator in the profession at the moment, and I know many of you are, who are the students that you teach? And I want you to think about the different forms of diversity that exist in your classroom, all right? And then if you can put down a note for me and I'll start it so that you'll know what I'm thinking about. Our student populations vary. We don't have the same. No classroom can have the same. Homogeneity is what they call it. Homogeneous means everyone's the same. It's not like that. Remember what I said at the start, the world has changed. We are no longer where we were. Things are very different. Our students differ on account of racial diversity, as we said earlier, cultural diversity, academic diversity, and language diversity. there could be other forms of diversity as well. And if I'm missing one, you add it in the chat as well. So I'm going to start by adding the type of diversity that I see at Monash University where I work. And then I'm going to ask you to just type in something in the chat as well. So here I'm going to say that okay, thank you for waiting for me. Here we go. Now, Monash's strength lies in the fact that we have a very large international student population. We even have a campus in China, and the largest language background is coming from, well, sections of China. They don't all speak the same language, but, you know, it's because it's different parts of China. So the majority of the students are from China. There is a very large Indonesian population, as you know as well, because Monash has a campus in Indonesia, led by Professor Andrew McIntyre. But there are other, and I'm sure across Indonesia as well, there's different language groups too. So the majority are from China. So let's say if you can put into the chat about what is the biggest diversity element in your classroom? Is it culture? Are the students probably speaking the same language, but they are different cultural backgrounds? Or do you think that it's academic diversity that's the challenge? So, yep, we have one started. Thank you, Nanang. So we've got language diversity. And Reinhard said there's academic diversity. And there's a bit of cultural diversity going on as well. All right, so very good. It's good that we can recognize this. Let's keep going. Is there any other? So Indonesian students are generally from the same racial background, generally. I would think so. Yeah. I think that in Australia, there's huge diversity in terms of race. You know, there's lots of racial and social and economic diversity. Yes, is a huge element as well. You know, so when we think in terms of economic background and social background, this becomes a challenge for modern educators too. So that can become challenging for us. Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that? Not so much. Okay, let's think then in terms of the cultural and the language background to some degree. Academic was probably one of the points as well, and about how we are now going to assist students who come from this background. So regardless of what the diversity is, remember differentiated instruction by virtue of its name as well is now going to accommodate some form of diversity. So we are going to be thinking about it in that context as well. So I'm just going to minimize the chat for a moment and then I'm going to keep going. Okay, so let's keep talking about it. Now, those of you who attended a workshop with me some months ago from BINUS, this was a while ago. There must have been about 30 participants in that workshop a while ago. You might have been there. You would have probably seen me use this image. It's very, very popular on the internet. In fact, it's had a few variations over time. This visual is depicting the difference between the word equality and the word equity. So when we think about equality, if you look at the boxes on the left-hand side, all the students, all the spectators of this game, let's assume they are students, they are all getting exactly the same box. 1, 2, 3, exactly the same box. The first person is already very tall, highly able, from a dominant culture, from a dominant language background, but he's getting the same advantage as the one in the middle, who seems to be somewhat able to maneuver the language, probably has a good cultural language background as well. I'm going to say good, I mean fitting into that space. But the last individual with the purple shirt, the shortest person on the far right-hand side, he's the one who is struggling the most, because even though he's been given a support system, he still can't see. He's still struggling. So equality doesn't quite work in our classrooms. What works is the word equity. And I know these are English concepts, but think about it anyway, because you know what the Indonesian translation is. Equity is where we think about giving a student support at the point that they need it. And sometimes that means not giving support to those students like the person on the extreme left who already has a great deal. So the person on the extreme left has a blue shirt with an orange pants, and you can see he's quite able. Without any support, he's able to see the game, he's participating, his hand is in the air, enjoying the game, and so on. The one in the middle has received the support that any classroom teacher will give, but the one on the extreme right has received double support and required that support in order to be able to fully participate. And you notice both his hands are raised in the air because he's now participating in the game as well. So what does this mean for us as teachers? As educators, it simply means that we cannot give every student the same treatment, which we often do. It's what we call teaching to the middle. So in other words, everybody gets exactly the same thing. But equity means that we think about our classrooms and we think about the students in our classrooms and what each one of them requires. All right. Do you have any questions about the difference between equality and equity? This is usually where I pause in my class and ask them about it, to say, do you think you know the difference between equity and equality? Any questions?
Any question from the audience? Maybe I will start. Well, it is a challenge for teacher, for lecturer sometimes to explain to the parents.
Yes.
Sometimes the parents not satisfying with the policy from school, let's say, to divide certain people with certain conditions.
Yeah.
The parents cannot understand what the purpose of this kind of we say making a group or giving a different exercise.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
that's
How do we handle that?
how to deal with this kind of parents.
Yes, that's a very, very good question, and thank you for raising that early on. So good question, Anang. So let's say this is the best way that I explain it because the resistance is exactly the same in Australia. So, when we have students, for example, with a disability, and, you are accommodating them and modifying their work, and then sometimes it's not even the parent at the university level, it could even be a sibling or even another student who gets upset. And so I often say, when I first started teaching, I also didn't want the labels. You didn't want the labels. You didn't want this person to be told, like, they have a learning disability, or this one has ADHD, or whatever the case might be, because there's a bit of stigma attached to it. When you label something, it means that it's derogatory. But let's say if someone was unwell, physically unwell, and they went to a doctor, doesn't the doctor put a label on it in order to provide the correct medication? So say if someone had a very bad cough or a cold and they went to the doctor and they said, no, I don't know what's going on. For the last 3 days, the person has had coughing and kept them up at night and so on. And if the doctor says, well, I can't quite label it because I don't know whether you will mind, so I'm just going to give you some medication, but I'm not sure, that person would be very annoyed. If it was us, we'd get really annoyed because, you'd say, tell me what's wrong. Tell me the label, in other words. So that, why do you need the label? Because then you can manage it. You can then take care of it. You can, here in South Africa, I'm in South Africa at the moment, there's a lot of traditional remedies, so there's lots of doctors, but there's also lots of traditional remedies that people use when people are sick. So you need a label. You need to come home and tell the rest of your family, this is what the doctor said. If you don't have a label, you can't address it. So I think that's the best way that I have accommodated students, both students who have been, gifted and they've been very able and highly accelerated, and then students who have struggled because they don't have any ability to accomplish certain things. And I often tell the parent or their sibling, whoever comes to speak to me, that we need the label. If we don't have the label, we don't know how to address it. I don't know how to manage it. If you just say, oh no, it's a generalized disability. But if you said to me, this person has autism, they're on the autism spectrum disorder, then I'm going to say, oh yes, so this person is going to need very explicit instruction. I'm going to have to put up charts in the classroom with directions. In my PowerPoint, I'm going to number it. I might color code it because I know this student who has autism is going to respond very well to that. But if I didn't know that and they just said, oh no, it's a general learning disability, there is no way that I'm going to know how to specifically address this. What do you think, Nanang? Do you think that would address it?
Yeah. So is it label is like a baseline to for starting?
Yes, to start with.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, to start with. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
and then you start with it. So you must remember as well that when we do something for one student, when you use universal design for learning, which is part of a differentiated instruction, accommodating one student means that you're accommodating many others. So in my classroom, if I'm teaching, and I'm, like I said, I often teach pre-service teachers, I number things and I say, step 1 is for you to go to the internet and search for this. So I give them a step-by-step direction. This is going to assist the student who has a disability in my classroom, but every other student is also going to benefit from that as well, because it's very structured and it's organized and it's logical and it's unfolding well. It's like, if someone had an ailment or an illness and they knew the steps that they needed to take, others will look at it and they think, oh yeah, that would be very helpful for us too. And that's what they would do. So I think knowing and labeling, we don't want to have the label because we want to reduce the student. You want to say, oh, this person has a disability and they must be less than. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we want to know the label because we want to help them. We want them to be able to manage the condition so that they too can achieve the success that they want. So it's an important thing to do, I think.
Yeah. That's very interesting. We know the level to help them to have the students. Right?
Yeah, to help them.
This kind of magic word. Yeah. Okay. From
any other questions?
participants?
Do you think? What do you think?
Participants, you can ask. You can raise hand. Okay, Reinhard.
I was kind of curious about how to dealing with parents who expect the student, especially in Asia family, parents expect student good in math, but actually there is student who turns out good and athletic and they disapprove. How the educator have to explain to them and not make a conflict? Is that they accept their children ability.
Yes. I know parental pressure can be a challenge in any classroom. It's especially like you said, in the Asian cultures, there's a valuing of education and there's a reduction of anything that's in the arts, in the sporting field or the arts. And I know that is a huge challenge. But remember, learning is a balanced approach, and that's why we try to live balanced lives as well. You would know that as much as I do, that it's not just about the head knowledge that we have. It's not just about us learning things and knowing things, but it's also about the application of things. So I think if you are speaking to parents and they believe that there must be more of an academic pursuit in the child's life, you're probably needing to remind them that intelligence is balanced across many things. It's not just focusing on knowledge, it's on application, and application often comes through the sporting field or through the performing arts or through media. And where a person draws, and I have a student where the parent said, no, I don't want my child to be an artist because that's not going to bring them a lot of money. They should become a doctor or they should become an engineer because that's where all the money is. But that student is contributing to the tapestry in a different way. Their thread is very different, but the value is still there. We still need the artists. We still need the media specialists. We still need the actors. And we need the people on stage. We do need engineers and we do need doctors, but there's plenty of them as well. So it's a case of Reinhard telling the parent where that student fits in. And the point at which they fit in might be very different from the point at which the doctor fits in, and where the engineer fits in, and where the lawyer fits in, and where the teacher fits in. So, every one of us occupies a space in our world. And all of us can't occupy the same space because there will be gaps everywhere else in the spaces that we are. What do you think? Do you think you could use that as a starting point with your discussion?
I think so, because it's interesting to me to understand the parent's point of view.
Yes. It is good to understand the parent's point of view because parents drive the education process. I mean, I'm a parent too, and I know that too. So, it's a case of us knowing where do our children fit in, what contribution are they going to make to the world? And often I use that word contribution as well. You might know the word in Bahasa as well. The contribution means that every student is going to contribute differently. I often use food as a metaphor, and I used it already, because I often say that, we don't, when we eat something at a table, and I'm sure you are the same as well, it's not just one ingredient that goes into the pot when it's being cooked. For example, I'm here in South Africa, there's a lot of food here, very traditional food. There's vegetable that goes in, there are spices, there's salt, and there's oil, and there's meat, and there's herbs, whatever, whatever is put into it. And it comes together to formulate this dish. And in the same way, students come together in a classroom. We can't all be the same thing in the classroom. All of us can't be the vegetables. All of us can't be the spices. Each ingredient is occupying a different role. So for that child to find their space in the world and contribute and add value to where they are, they have to find out what role am I fulfilling? Am I the spice? Am I the meat? Am I the potatoes? Am I the carrots? Am I the herbs? Am I the oil? So because everybody is contributing in a different way. Anyway, all right, we might pick up that discussion a little further when we get to the differentiation idea. So I want us to think about us. Think about you, not your student now, just think about you. And I'll think about me as well. All right. Before we go to the left-hand side, you would have probably seen this definition of differentiated instruction that comes from Carol Tomlinson, who is a renowned professor from the United States. She was based at the University of Virginia, but I think she has retired now. And she said, differentiating instruction means that you observe and understand the differences and similarities among students and use this information to plan instruction. So in other words, at its heart, and the discussion that we were having up to this point aligns with that we look at what were we doing, or what are we doing as educators in order to accommodate the differences. Differences are not to be seen as a threat or as a disadvantage or as a reductive sense. It's actually something that's going to strengthen instruction. It's actually going to be better. And it's not that we have 30 students. I know some of you have hundreds in your classroom because you're teaching in some of the big groups. But a smaller class, I teach into the master's programs, and we often have about 50 students, which is not too bad. It's not to say I'm going to know every student in my class, but I often run a pre-teaching survey. So we are going to start in the new semester next year in 2023. And I'll probably do that, send in a pre-assessment survey so that I know where the students are sitting at. So then I will discover what contribution are they going to make? Are they going to be the meat? Are they going to be the potatoes or the oil or the spices or the herbs, or whatever, so that I can figure out where they fit in. So let's think in terms of ourselves on the left-hand side. How do you like to learn? What's your learning preference? Learning styles are a bit controversial. People don't think that they exist. There is a preference for us to learn. So let's think about you as the learner, all right? Do you like to learn visually? So I'll give you an example about visual learning. I won't do them all because it'll take too much time. My son, he's a very avid swimmer. He likes swimming. From the time he was a child, he absolutely loves swimming. But the minute he got into the pool, the water would get into his ears and he'd get an infection. And if you are a mom or a dad and you're listening to me, you might have had this experience as well. So he didn't put those little plugs in. He'd go into the water, he'd stay in the water for a long time, and the water would get in, and then the next thing you know, and when I say in the water, I mean in the water, not swimming. He'd go underground, underwater, and do whatever. So he'd be, because he enjoys it so much. But he'd always come out of the pool, and a few days later, he's got an ear infection. So over time, because it was so painful for him to be hearing, he started to rely on the visual. He started to rely on what he was seeing. So when he went to school, because the ears were hurting on those days, he was paying attention to what the teacher was writing on the board and the chalk. Well, not chalk, whiteboard. I'm saying chalk from my school days, but whiteboard marking and so on. And he'd just be relying on that. So he became very strongly a visual learner. So even now, he's older now, but he when he's learning, he looks at YouTube videos and he likes it better than if he had to listen to the teacher in the classroom. So he prefers to learn visually. He's much better now. Nowadays he's a responsible person and he puts the things into his ears before he goes into the water. So it's much better. But he became a visual learner. Think about yourself. Where do you fit in? Social learners are the ones who like to speak. The ones who, in order to learn, they need to explain it to somebody else. And people like this. You might be one of them. So when you learn something, the best way for you to reinforce the learning is to talk about it to somebody else. And that strengthens the learning within yourself. But there are many of us who prefer to watch it in action, like a teacher who shows us how to work something out by doing it themselves, and that works for us. Some of us like to learn in a solitary way. Solitary means that you learn that you get the instruction from the teacher gives you the chapter number and the question, and you go off by yourself, and you sit there alone, and you can get it done by yourself. Some students like a little bit of background noise, they like a bit of music in the background. It's not always the wise thing. I don't encourage it. Maybe you might think about it as well, because background noise can actually be very distracting, especially if it has words. And then thirdly, the last one, how about learning for long stretches? There are some people who can learn for an hour and they seem okay, and others need consistent breaks within that. So how do you learn? Let me tell you how I learn. All right, so I'm going to bring the chat back again. And my learning preference is as a solitary learner. I'm a bit of an introvert, so it makes sense for me. All right. So for me, I'm a solitary learner. Where do you see yourself? Let's have a quick, and remember, this is one of the ways that you can check your class as well. You can have all the labels, and then you can say, what's your preference? Would you like to learn alone? Do you like to learn socially, which means group work will be a huge boon and bonus for that student. Do you like to watch? So you might have more YouTube. So Nanang is a social learner. We are different. Yep. So let's get you to put it in. All right. And Reinhardt is also a social learner. Yay. All right. So we've got two social learners. Now, if I was the teacher in the classroom and I was getting this, I would think, well, I've got to have more group work because I have social learners, and in social learners like group work. Not group work to the point where they would kind of contribute to assessment tasks, but they might like discussion. I have another child, a girl who's younger, and she loves social learning. In fact, if she goes to the movies with her friends, to the cinema with her friends or with me, she likes to talk about the movie. So when someone makes a joke on the screen, she turns to me because she wants to tell me about it, because it makes it better. She enjoys it more if somebody else. So I'm not sure whether that would work. All right. So Melly says, I can't learn with background music too. It's too distracting. Solitary learner. There we go, Melly. Melly and I are on the same page. Solitary learner. There's a lot of students in South Africa, for example, who learn with background noise because it's a very noisy area. Lots of people here. South Africa has a population of 57 million and it's a small country. Indonesia is spread over a long space, but there's a lot of people living very close together here. So, Melly, I know exactly what you mean. You have to be quiet, no background noise at all. Yeah. Anyone else want to tell us about their learning preference? You're not feeling brave enough. No? Hannah thinks she's a visual learner. Yes. I think, well, my son would be the first to say he's a visual learner. He likes watching YouTube. It's probably his favorite way to learn. And if there's anything that you say that, you want him to learn anything, he Googles it on YouTube, and then he's got something that he can watch, and it solidifies the learning straight away. So say while others are thinking, say if in our class, we started the lesson and then you just had a quick survey amongst your students, like the one we're doing now, and you had 4 students who said they like visual learning, you had 8 students who said they are solitary, and then you had 2 students who said that they are social. You will have to then decide. Group work probably won't work because there's so many solitary learners in that group. But say if it was the opposite and you had 10 social learners, they like talking, you might introduce group work. You'll also have videos because you've got visual learners in that group as well. So Differentiated instruction simply means taking this and applying it to that teaching context. And then you have a blend of, you're not just catering for the solitary learner, because in the past, I mean, if I think about myself, when I was a student, and this is a very long time ago, I grew up here in South Africa, and the teacher only had one style of teaching. Came in with a textbook and stood at the front of the class, taught the lesson from the textbook, nothing else, no board work, no handout, no nothing. We had to just listen, take everything in and listen. And then from there, we had to answer the test questions, which was very hard for some people. All right. So Melly also says, I prefer to read material when it is presented with language other than Bahasa, but if it is Bahasa, I prefer to listen. Well, that's perfect, because language, of course, decides a great deal as well. It's like I was saying earlier, language can sometimes be presented as powerful, but language might not be that powerful. So we might want to think about that as well. That's a good point, Melly, because I think the language platform is also very important too. So good point. So where are we taking all this? Where are we funneling all this to? When you discover the preference, it will allow you then to accommodate the learning style a lot more comfortably. All right, let's move on. Okay, so what are we actually meaning when we are unpacking this idea of differentiated instruction? And like I said, the entire term has been popularized by Carol Tomlinson. She is one of the, now regarded as one of the kind of gurus of differentiated instruction. She's written multiple books and presented at different workshops in different universities around the world as well. And I've attended a couple where she's been at as well. And really strong advocate for it. So it's an approach to teaching and learning targeted at maximizing the academic progress of every student. So every student is accommodated. It doesn't mean that the student is going to be personalized. If you have, like I said, if you have 50 students in the class, that you're going to have 50 different techniques. No, it means that you run this pre-class survey and you find out how their learning style affects the way that they learn, and then you accommodate that in the learning that you undertake as you go. And that's an important element when we think about differentiated instruction, because students come to us, like I said, with different needs. And if they are being accommodated, they are going to engage in the lesson much better. Their academic outcomes are going to be better. You're going to have better results at the end of the day. Okay, so we think of it in terms of content, process, product, and environment. And if you look at this, and I'm going to send you the slides, am I not? No?
Yeah.
Yep. And you can have a look at the details in the slide when you look at it, and you will realize that it's taking into account 4 different elements. So I want you to think about this visually now, and even though we are not all visual learners, this is a good way to think about it. A table has 4 legs. There are some tables that have 3. I'm sure you have a table with 3 legs as well, but the majority of our tables
4.
have 4. If you think about the 4 legs, this is what Tomlinson is suggesting, that every leg is, one is content, one is process, one is product, one is environment, and every one of them is contributing to the sturdy upholding of that table. If one leg is removed, the table might still stand, but it will be very unsteady. So we might need to think about how is every one of these elements taken care of in the classroom, so every student receives a healthy education. It's a very stable, healthy educational context there. Okay, let's think about it individually, all right? So the first one, if differentiated instruction has been divided up into, and if the colors don't come in very well, sometimes it's good to use color, but sometimes when you share it, it doesn't look as good on a PowerPoint. But anyhow, you will know that the 4 table legs are therefore going to be content, process, product, and learning environment. And then the second layer of that is that we need to consider the student. We consider their readiness level. So in other words, when they come into the classroom, what do they know previously? There are some students, so say if all of you are probably quite familiar with Bahasa, and you said you are teaching students how to speak Bahasa from another country, they would come in with different forms of readiness. Some might have heard some words previously, or they might have tried Indonesian food, so they know a few words. Others might have visited and know a few sentences. Others might have family members who speak the language, and so they are quite familiar. So the readiness level will change. You'll change when you're speaking, when you're teaching someone to speak the language. Similarly, interest levels also alter the way people see things. Now, interest level simply means that we think about it in terms of what's the student's background interest? Will they enjoy this? Will they enjoy studying about this? So the interest level changes as well. And then also we think in terms of their profile. Student profiles, of course, are what we were talking about earlier, about the kind of ability and disability they bring into the classroom with them. So there's, different profiles. Some students are very able, they bring a lot of ability and strength and academic prowess into the classroom, but there are some students who might struggle. So the academic ability is an important element to consider. But remember that student profiles are also important when we think about language background and we think about cultural background. That's an important aspect to be considering as well. And sometimes, for example, in Australia and here in South Africa, it might be about racial background as well, because race also is a huge factor when it comes to a country that has been affected by race. Let's look at them one at a time, and then we'll pause for some questions as well. What do we mean when we talk about content? Now, content is one of the table legs. So content refers to what we teach, the material we teach, the concepts we teach, the skills that we think a student should know. The content of a differentiated lesson should be varied to accommodate different ability levels. So let's think about how we change content. So in the workshop I did at Venus, probably last year, Nanang, that we met for a workshop? I think it might have been.
Yeah,
we talked about the different ways, different ways that we could adjust content. So we talked about varied text forms. So when I say text forms, I mean, we often use textbooks. We still use textbooks in Australia. You might have a textbook that is in hard copy, an actual book, in other words. Some might like ebooks. Some students enjoy the ebook. Some students like audiobooks. Some students like books that are read to them on YouTube. So by presenting them with varied text forms, you're giving them different ways to access content. Some students like a summarized version, and nowadays there are actual websites that summarize books, which is very interesting as well. Another way of differentiating content is to think about curriculum compacting. So curriculum compacting is especially for students who are either struggling, having trouble with their work, or someone who is very advanced and very accelerated and needs to move. So the compacting for the student with a disability, for example, might be where you leave out certain things in order to accommodate the student with a disability. But the student who is accelerating and, performing at a level that's probably a year or two higher than the others, means that you might say, look, we're going to be leaving this out, but I'd like you to have a quick read of it overnight, and then you can move on to topic 4 or topic 5 or whatever the case might be. That is compacting, where you accommodate it based on the student's needs as well. The third is topic choices based on interests. Remember, we talked about this earlier. If a student is interested in certain fields, we accommodate that in the classroom. We think in terms of where they could contribute and what they could do, because their topics are might be interested. Them, like, the World Cup is on. I don't know how much Indonesia gets involved in the World Cup. Do Indonesians enjoy soccer? Not so much. Yes. Do you have a team?
But we never
they enjoy
joined the
soccer.
World Cup.
They enjoy it. So which section are they in? Like, what are they still in the game, or have they been knocked out in the World Cup? Are they still playing?
We never joined the Cup.
We never qualified for.
Oh, you didn't qualify for. Oh, what a shame! Oh, gosh.
We are great for badminton, though. Great for
Oh,
badminton.
right. Good with badminton. Okay. So I just brought up the World Cup because it's happening at the moment. It's on the news all the time, and everyone's paying attention to it. But soccer might be a huge element. All right. So let's say if a student enjoys playing badminton, the student's interest is badminton. You have to accommodate that interest in the classroom, and it becomes part of the discussion that we have in our classrooms as well, and we talk about it so that engages the student too. So, you might have a scenario based on a badminton match, or if the student was interested in soccer or the World Cup, then we'd be talking about that as well. But we can also involve the student in real world situations. I know a lot of the Australian universities are trying this at the moment, where there's real challenges facing the world. You can't overlook it. Like, when COVID-19 was happening, we couldn't say it's not happening. It was there, it was facing us, it was confronting us. We had no choice. So involving students in real world situations to say, okay, we've got this situation with the global pandemic. How would we adjust what we are doing to suit that? That became involvement in a real world situation. So that students were encountering it when they went home, when they were speaking to their parents, when they're speaking to their brothers and sisters, they were bringing that discussion into the classroom as well. So content had to be modified and changed and varied. And what I'm saying on the second line here are just some examples. There are multitudes of ways to differentiate content. This is not the only way to do it. You know that there are different ways to do that. All right. What about differentiating process? The process, of course, is the delivery of the lesson. So the process is what kind of strategies do we use? What kind of activities do we get involved in order to help students to make sense of the content? So, in a differentiated classroom, the teacher may implement varied means of allowing students to interact with the content. And this obviously makes a huge difference here. So if we think about it in that respect, we know that differentiating the delivery style, the strategy that is being used, is going to change the way that we view the lesson as well. So let's look at some examples there. You've got 4, but remember again, there are several others. You could look at the fact that there are different information processing speeds. This means some students will hear something and they'll get it straight away. It's just like it's normal for them to just proceed from there. Very varied information processing. Another student might require more time. You might have to say something and you might have to give the class some processing time, because they will need to think about what you just said so that they can make meaning of that, which means you'll have to accommodate that speed as well. Secondly, it's what we talked about earlier. Some students prefer to work in groups and others prefer to work individually. We've got to accommodate this. Often it happens in our classrooms, we just say, we're going to do some group discussion. Everyone get into groups of 3 or groups of 4, and we're going to talk about this topic. Some students may not like that because all they are doing in that individual group session is, or sorry, not individual, in the group session is listening. What I've done recently, and I did try this as well when we did it with the team at Binus, we had a Google Doc, or we had a Padlet, where students who prefer to learn in a solitary manner they don't have to join the group. They can just put their contribution into that platform, whether it was Padlet or whether it was Google Docs, and everybody knew where they were heading. So it was different. I also create scaffolds. Scaffolds means that we create learning platforms. So, where once you know the previous concept really well, you move on to the next one and the next one. Scaffolding also means that you become very structured in the way that you teach. So structured working means that I used a step-by-step approach. So I think step 1, you do this, step 2, you do that, and step 3, I'm all about the systems. Students who are in my classes know that. And so scaffolds work a great deal for me as well. And then we think about questioning techniques, so the kinds of questions that we ask. And it's very interesting that when we think about questions, we think that they should be asked in the classroom. But sometimes you should plan your questions even before you get into the classroom. So even before you are standing there in front of your students, or if you're teaching online and you are in front of the screen, what are some of the questions that you're going to be asking? So, we don't want questions to just be lower order questions where there's yes and no answers. You want questions to be higher order, where students are thinking about the things that they're going to contribute. So discussion questions will not be yes and no questions. They will be coming from various angles as well. All right. Any questions so far? Anything that we need to be posing for? Nadang, I'm not sure what time you want to stop.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Here we also have faculty members, Pak Dedi, Mas Aryo, Pak Wing, maybe any comment or questions? Or other participant from students?
That should be
Yeah.
fine. Maybe we'll take it as we're going.
We
Should be
just
good.
continue.
Yep. All right. So we keep going and we'll pause for questions as we're going. So the third leg, remember we talk about the table and we said that there's 4, and here's the third one. This is the product. And the product is referring to the assessment task. The assessment task is what are we expecting students to produce at the end of the learning unit. They will now demonstrate or illustrate what they've come to know as a result of participating in this bit of knowledge. And this usually refers to some form of assessment, some form of test maybe, that they will undertake at the end that will give us an idea of whether our teaching has been successful. So when we think about product differentiation, we think about offering students choices. Not every student responds well to a choice. Some students like choices and others don't. So even there to check with your students. So, I would have used this analogy before as well. If you've ever gone into a supermarket and you found, for one product, to say if you're going in and you're buying a can of peas or something like that, and you found 50 different brands, the choice is overwhelming. You don't know which one to choose because there's too many. But if the supermarket just carried 2 or 3, you could probably make up your mind very quickly. So think about choice a bit more judiciously and a bit wisely as well, and whether your class will respond well to the choice. It's very important when you undertake product differentiation that you use a constructed rubric. And rubrics are the marking criteria that we use to assess a task. This is something that the students must have beforehand. So it's not something that you give them after you finished marking. You show them the rubric before they start the task so that they know where the emphasis is being placed. So if there's a lot of emphasis on the knowledge and the skill that they're expected to demonstrate, and you think 50% of the marks are coming from there, they will know that that's where they need to focus their attention. If it's all about paragraphing and crafting and so on, then you know that the marks might go somewhere else. So using a rubric which students have beforehand is also going to be useful as well. So we don't have time today to actually talk about how to construct a rubric, but if you think you need help with that, then we could always do that in the next one. So thirdly, think about, again, what we talked about earlier, that the assessment task should be based on student interests and backgrounds. Although you might not be a sport person, and neither am I, although family members of mine are, but most are not. Let's say if it was the World Cup and you were in a country where the World Cup was very important, say if it was happening in Qatar, in Doha, where the World Cup is actually happening, you can't really ignore it. It's there. It's taking place in their country. So it might be that some students might be very interested in all the different nationalities that have arrived and their backgrounds and so on, and you bring all of that together. And then the fourth is considering the level of student comprehension, which ties in with what we said earlier about information processing. So student comprehension, remember, occurs at different speeds. And in our classrooms, because of their different learning preferences, some might process faster and some might require a little more time. So always accommodate for that. And therefore we say, when you are accommodating information processing, you think in terms of supplementing understanding by not just presenting one means. Like at the moment, even though this is a very transmissive exercise, I'm speaking and you are listening, we've got a visual as well, so there's a PowerPoint that you are looking at as well, where you can interact with one another as well. So think about your level of comprehension, think about your students' level of comprehension as well. All right? Okay. So I've not done learning environment because we're going to do that at another stage. The learning environment, like I said, is a fourth leg of the table, and it's something that is a bit more holistic in the way that we think about it, because the learning environment can be the space where we are now. It's an online space, us together. We are in a learning environment, but it's online. You could have a learning environment that's in the classroom where students are meeting together around a table. I think some of you are together at the moment, aren't you, Nana?
A certain student are in the same place, but
yes,
from the different places.
Yes, and the reason I paused on this one was because at the moment we teach in what is called flexible and hybrid modes. So which means that we have students in our classrooms, not now, but I usually have some students sitting in front of me, and then I've got some students are online. So, and then that class is being recorded as well. So it's very interesting that we've got these multiple layers of things where we have to accommodate it. And I thought we'd spend a bit more time on that because the learning environment has changed after COVID. All right. Now, just to summarize Tomlinson's ideas on differentiated instruction, in 2009, apart from all the work she had done since, the early 2000s on differentiated instruction, she came up with 4 premises, and it seems like 4 is her magic number in a way, because the first thing she said is that effective educators teach up. Teaching up means that we set high expectations for our students and we want them to rise to that level. Secondly, we think that educators should study their students in order to teach them well. And we discussed that as well earlier, that you have to know your students in order to accommodate them well. And thirdly, we respond to student readiness, interest, and learning profile to enhance their success. So the student becomes at the heart of everything that we do. We become facilitators in the classroom in a way. And then finally, students differ as learners because we know that they are different and each one of them is in a different context as well. All right. How are we doing so far? All good? Yep.
Yep.
So some of the things that I thought came out of this, and I shared this last week as well, is that I think that coming up with a quick startup activity, in every class, I mean, not just in one class, but it helps students to think about where they are at in that moment that the lesson is starting. Also, what they remembered from the previous lesson and what you might be planning to go on to for that lesson. So this is the way I would usually meet my class. First day, I usually do a pre-assessment survey. And so I kind of know a bit about them. No, it's not very hectic. I use Google Forms and I use 3 questions. Very easy. It's about learning preferences usually. So when they come in, I kind of have an idea of how they like to learn. So whether they will enjoy group work or solitary or whatever, long stretches of talking and so on. But when they come in, I often begin with a warm-up activity. So I start them off with an activity usually involving either Google Forms again or Padlet, which gives me an indication of how they are starting up. What are they doing in order to get started in that space? So I plan the questions beforehand, which is number 2, so that I don't need to think on the spot. So I have usually about 7 or 8 open-ended questions that I'd like to ask students. They don't need to answer me individually. They can get into groups and speak about it in groups. But if you plan a few open-ended questions, and I use Bloom's taxonomy, and if you don't know what's Bloom's taxonomy, Google it for now, because Bloom's taxonomy is a pyramid and it tells us about the kinds of questions we should be asking in the classroom. Not all of them are meant to be easy questions. You don't ask what questions, what are you doing, or what are you hoping to achieve, because a what question could be very simple to answer, but you might want to ask a why or a how question, because that's going to get students thinking. So you'll notice Bloom's taxonomy can be very helpful when it comes to that. Okay, moving on. Now, we are in higher education, and the majority of us, I'm sure, are not school teachers. The majority of us are teaching in higher education classrooms. So here are some of the things that we should consider, because remember, the students who come to us are already performing at a fairly high level. They are university entrants, university students, in other words. So when we think about higher education, I'm thinking from my context, but you can apply this in yours as well, that there were previous dominant social, racial, and cultural hierarchies in the spaces where we're at. They influence the way that we think. They influence the way in which we interact with our students and with each other. So we've got to become aware of that background idea as well. We also think that education is about relationships, how students get along with one another, and how that knowledge transfer will happen in classrooms. So for example, I have a group of students where they just finished now because our semester 2 just ended. And there were 25 in the class, and about 22 of them were from China. And the last 3 were from Australia. They were from China, but they were based in Australia. So the first thing I needed to know is, how are they accommodating the fact that they might not have seen their families since COVID began, and, is that impacting on them? And, each one of them had a portion of time to talk about that. Not everybody wanted to talk about it, but some students were quite happy to talk about it. How is it that affecting the way that they are now accommodating learning, being so far away from their families? And although the world is opening up in terms of COVID-19 and, we are traveling across the globe and everything seems to be fine, there are still sections of China where things are closed. So they are affected by that. So I had to think about that when I talked about relationships. Before I think about knowledge and skill transfer, I've got to be thinking about how it affects their relationships. So we also seem to have adopted a very strong Eurocentric lens. And I thought I'd stop for a bit of discussion here. A Eurocentric lens means that we see it from the Western perspective. We see it from the view of the West, so even using English is a Western perspective. And I wanted to know how much of the Western way of learning has come into Indonesia as well. And do we need to think about differentiated instruction when we think about traditional learning as well? What do you think? So Nenang, what do you think? Has there been a lot of the Western education styles in Indonesia?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of scholars, Indonesian scholars, who receive education from Western countries. So it's they bring their experience to also share it in Indonesia. But as we are the fourth big populations in the world, so although there are many Indonesian scholars who receive from Western countries, but there are also teachers who still apply the traditional teaching style. So as you told your experience, and it has also happened to me when I was in primary school. I just received one style of teaching from my my teacher. So just bring the book and then ask a student to write on the whiteboard, and then we just write it down in our textbook, in our writing book.
Yes.
But it's I mean we also have schools that's use the international curriculums at like IB, Cambridge, certain schools in Indonesia also use the international curriculum.
Yeah, and that's an important aspect for the modern world. But is Indonesian culture and language accommodated in that though? Is Indonesia still part of that curriculum, or is it very Western?
We still use our national curriculum. 5 years ago, I think certain school can autonomy has their autonomy to use the international curriculum, but currently our government already have regulations that all school have to apply the national curriculums and provide a certain but provide a certain rooms for school who also will apply the international curriculum. So but the most of the school are using the national curriculums,
which is excellent because it's now becoming more context specific. So in other words, we are accommodating the context, which is what we want. We want more of, like in South Africa, although I don't teach here. I left the country a long time ago, but when we think about the way in which the curriculum was arranged here, for example, it was very Western. It was in English and there was a lot of Western influence. But over the years, because they have now started to become differentiated in the way that they still have that curriculum, but they've built in elements for the traditional languages and the traditional cultures and traditional race groups and so on, so that there's an accommodation of the people who live here, which is important. Yeah, does anyone else want to comment on that, about how we see interaction in the classroom in terms of social, racial, and cultural hierarchies?
Okay, please, participants, you can write in the chat room or open mic.
Okay, I think there is a
Okay.
big differences that makes there is a lot of conflict because the differences to make people understand the lesson. For example, for Batanese people, they really don't understand about Japanese point of view, so it's hard
Yeah.
to them understand about them, and sometimes they stereotype about it, and it makes the conflict about it. And instead, they want to know the knowledge, they choose to stereotype it. I think this apa, is the first instruction is have to use to them so they can understand it. Learning them to make not big differences, to know the differences is good for them, to learn about the differences and respect the boundaries. I guess that I see in the hierarchies, cultural hierarchies.
Yes, and that's very good. I like the fact that there's so is there a lot of Japanese culture in Indonesia?
I think some people are really weeboo.
Okay. I didn't know that.
There's so
It,
many
it
weeboo.
yes, and that's what happens when it's a multicultural community anyway. So you get quite a bit of background difference as well. Yeah. That's good. Thank you for that contribution. It's very informative. Very good. All
Okay.
right. So Nanang, if you're okay, you
Yeah.
want me to carry on to the last one. So we've just for time reasons.
Yeah. Okay. It's already 11:22, so we have 8 minutes left. So
Yep.
maybe you can. Is there any slide that you want to share? Paul, again?
So what I might do is just to bring it to a close, I'll use my,
Yeah.
my closing slide, and then let's say if somebody has a question though, because we are meeting again,
Yeah.
we could probably start our seminar off with questions. So the seminar can begin with the questions. And so today, remember I said that it was going to be all about thinking. And it's good, and we are going to do some strategies later on, but we are going to be thinking. So the first thing is we've got to adopt a more inclusive mindset. Inclusive means that we accommodate all the students. So it's ability, it's race, it's language, it's culture, it's background, it's socioeconomic background, whatever. So adopt a more inclusive mindset. Secondly, think about representing and engaging the students. Representing means that they have to find themselves in that space. The student has to find themselves in that space. They have to engage in that space as well. The third element is that the student who is feeling a bit marginalized and who has not been accommodated will feel like they are silenced. Think about that diagram, that the picture we saw much earlier about equality and equity, and the student who was the shortest and who needed the most support. To give that student voice, he needed 2 boxes to stand on. You might have to do that in your classroom as well. Fourth, think about traditional wisdom. Often in a context, we ignore what was there previously and we just move on with the new, and we bring in a more Western Eurocentric lens, and it's probably not going to work because a lot of us have traditional and ancient connections, which must be introduced into the classroom as well. Fifth, the focus for us as differentiated educators is to think about limiting prejudice. We don't want any bias. We don't want students to be feeling less than. If we are using the image of the tapestry, think that they all add value. Every one of them brings a different thread in and they add value so that the tapestry looks beautiful. And then finally, there's power. Every one of our classrooms have power. Everybody has different spaces of power. We want the power dynamic to be balanced so that students will shape and rethink how they work in those contexts as well. We don't want one group to be feeling dominant or to be dominating the others. That's not fair when we think about it. All right. What do you think so far? All good?
Yeah. It's really a very important point that you share with
Yeah.
us. So yeah, it's very interesting, but because we have limited time, so for discussion, I think we will continue
We could
on
probably pick it up when we meet
the
on
5th
the
December.
5th. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So but I think I will give once opportunity for question maybe from the participant
Yeah.
before
Sure.
for the
Absolutely.
closings.
Yeah.
Any comment or any questions? Yeah. For students, I think the material that's we got from Dr. Suban is very, very important in terms of writing or the articles. So you can use this material to guide as a guideline in writing the articles of differentiated instruction. So I believe that this article will this a presentation will be shared.
Shared, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
When it's all finished, I'll send it to you on the 5th.
Okay.
Because
So
there's more in the slide. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's already 11:26. I think it's time for closings. Before closings, of course, there will be photo sessions. So
I'll stop sharing so that we can see
yeah.
everyone.
So we say thank you to Dr. Paul Subans. Thank you very much for this valuable sharing sessions. And
It was a
we'll
pleasure.
continue on the 5th of December.
Absolutely.
I give the time to Hannah for closings.
Thank you, Pananang. So everyone, we have finally come to the end of the part of this sharing session. We would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Pearl Subant, for her informative and interesting presentation, and also to all of you for your participation. I would like to remind you all to fill the attendance form in the link shared in the chat room before we close this interesting session. Let's take a photo together. Please prepare for your best appearance. Turn on your camera so I can see all of you. Go. Okay, I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Wait.
Okay.
Following is on.
All right.
Again.
Okay.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. One again. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. We hope that everyone had an enjoyable moments throughout today's session. This is all from us. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you, Dr. Pearl. Thank you, Panana.
Dr.
Thank
Pearl. See you
you.
on the 5th of December.
See you again.
Yeah. Thank you. Oke, thank you ya teman-teman. Akhirnya datang juga. Makanya saya sudah deg-degan. Ya, nanti setelah ini kita akan meeting lagi ya. Tapi kita masuk dulu ke meeting ini yang sosialisasi yang PKKM ya.
Iya Pak, untuk mahasiswanya juga ikut yang Monef yang untuk mahasiswa Pak.
Ya. Jadi kita semua masuk dulu ke sesi yang PKKM ya untuk evaluasi. Setelah ini nanti sesi siang kita akan kumpul lagi ya all LS ya terkait dengan evaluasi yang nanti akan dilakukan ya, karena ada laporan-laporan yang harus dibuat ya. Jadi nanti kita bikin Zoom lagi ya. Jadi sekarang kita masuk dulu ke PKKM, kemudian nanti kita istirahat sholat Jumat ya. Nanti jam 1 lagi ya. Kalau seandainya meeting PKKM masih lanjut, kita lanjut. Kalau seandainya meeting PKKM-nya sudah selesai, kita akan buat Zoom khusus ya untuk evaluasi tindak lanjut dari meeting PKKM. Sekarang kita join dulu ke yang meeting PKKM ya. Oke, thank you.